record. So we are continuing the story of Lot and his daughters. And I hope you either read the material or listened to it or are generally aware of the story. So we have in the Torah, we have a story of Abraham's nephew, Lot, who lives in Sodom, and some angels who are disguised as men or come and visit him. Actually, basically, God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he consults with Abraham, who convinces him, if you can only find 10 righteous people, spare the city. And apparently he doesn't. So the angels come and they basically want to give Lot, Abraham's nephew, a heads up and the idea that you should take your family and leave. Presumably they were righteous. So he's going to, the angels are going to get them to escape. And when these strangers come to town, Lot's home is surrounded by the townspeople who basically ask Lot to send the strangers, these men out in the street, so that so that people basically the men can rape them. And the Hebrew is so that they can know them. And the biblical understanding of that word know is to have sexual contact with them. And Lot, certainly protests this and with great energy and saying, these are my guests. And there is this sense, particularly in the Middle East, that if someone is your guest, that you come under their protection. I mean, Sonia has told me this, growing up in an Arab country, that if you were visiting someone and having dinner or staying over their house, they would defend you. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, to the death. Once you're out in the street, they may come and kill you, but while you're a protected guest, they are defending you. So Lot says, no, please don't do this. And he says, you know what? I have 2 daughters who are virgins, and how about if I send them out? And the men say, no, we want the guys. And apparently they're about to break down the door, and the angels are able to strike them blind. So they can't, they are unsuccessful in their attack. Meanwhile, the angels talk to Lot and his family and say, God is going to destroy this city, and you should get out. And apparently from the text, and I never noticed this before, but if you read it carefully, it appears as though the youngest daughters are betrothed or engaged, but they are not yet married. They're still virgins. And apparently their husbands or their fiancés think that Lot is kind of lost his mind or is not being serious or ridicules them. So the only people that leave are Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters. And they're apparently told, or Lot is told, don't look back. And Lot's wife looks back and is turned into a pillar of salt, presumably for looking back as the city is being destroyed. And then there's a very interesting little episode that's easy to overlook, that a Lot basically says, I can't go completely out into the wilderness, into these caves. Let me go to Zohar, which is a town. And so they're able to go to Zohar. And then later on, Lot says to his daughters, we have to leave Zohar because God is going to destroy this town also. So they go to a cave out in the middle of nowhere. And the daughters, and they witness the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they witness the destruction, presumably, of Zohar. Actually, I don't think they witnessed the destruction of Zohar. But the daughters believe that that the 3 of them, Lot and his 2 daughters, are the only people left alive on the earth. And the way the story goes in Genesis, they say, we have to make some babies, otherwise it's going to be the end of humanity. And so they get Lot drunk, and they basically lie with him. You can argue they rape him. They have sexual contact with him, and the older one gets pregnant and has a baby, and they name the baby Moab, who is the progenitor of the Moabites. and Moav means from dad. Me is the preposition from, Av is father, and the other one names the child Amnon, I think, and he's the progenitor of the Ammonites. Um, and that's pretty much the story. Um, and the first half of this article, which we read last week, was sort of a detailed look at the article, um, and you know, and looks and raises a bunch of interesting questions. Um, and the question arises, you know, what's really going on here? Did the daughters really seduce the father, or was the father attracted to the daughters? And I think, so I'm just going back a little bit in the text, and did I do the share screen? Can you see the screen? I can't remember.
You haven't done it yet.
Okay, let me go to share screen. So
I don't think. Let me check.
okay,
No.
yeah.
So Moab is, correct me if I'm wrong about this, Ruth is a Moabite and is the ancestor.
Yes. We're going to get there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the things that's mentioned early in this article is both the Moabites and the Ammonites are historical enemies of Israel. And I think in the story of the Exodus, they attack the weaker. I mean, I'm not sure they're as bad as the Amalekites, but they're basically historical enemies. And the simplest explanation of why this story is in the Bible is that it explains what rotten people they are. They are actually the product of incest. They're the product of rape and incest. And it's just one way of putting them down. So and in Deuteronomy it says, and I think it just says about the Moabites, but maybe about the Ammonites also. I can't now quite remember. It says, you will not admit anyone into the community of Israel from the Moabites, and I think the Ammonites, but I'm actually not certain about that. Ever, even to the 100th generation. And then all of a sudden we have Ruth, which is a Moabitess, and she's King David's great grandmother. So that's a really interesting thing going on here. I think that's.
I thought the ruling is that it's only the males that.
Well, that's how the rabbis get around it.
Okay.
The rabbis are very good because it says no Moabites, but it doesn't say anything about Moabitesses, namely female Moabites.
So you're thinking they're just rationalizing it. They didn't.
Yes. We are really good at that, Alan.
This is what
I have a problem with making the victims, being responsible when the people who were born to the events of his incest, who are the people who were guilty, shouldn't put any negative the victims, the children who were born.
So you got basically what you have is. Have you ever heard the expression of called son of a bitch? Okay. So basically you're saying to a person that you really don't like or is your enemy that they have questionable birth. And the Bible is doing this. The Bible basically is saying, well, we have these people that we really don't like, the Moabites, and sure, lo and behold, they're the product of incest.
Now, do dogs say son of a human woman?
I don't know. Next time you see one, ask me.
Hold
on a second, Les.
Didn't Moses marry a Moabite woman?
Yes, a Midianite. No, Moses married a Midianite, not a Moabite.
Midianite?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I always thought it was a Moabite. Thank you.
No, Midianite.
Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, you had something else?
The second son, Amon, or something like that. Is he the one who the capital of Jordan is named for?
No, I have no idea.
I know the capital city of Jordan.
Yeah, it's Amman, but I have no idea if they were. That's the historical area of the Ammonites. It could be. Okay. So I'm backing up a little bit. We read this last week. I mean, here is actually the text. It's probably worth looking at that. It said, that night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with the father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Sounds like he was pretty drunk, maybe even blacked out. The next day, the older one said to the younger, "See, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. You go in and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down and when she rose. Thus the two daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. And again, reading in this article, why did the daughters feel the need to get Lot drunk if this is a noble cause? And why is Lot's response to what they all believed was the end of human race to get drunk night after night? The reader hearer of the story must also imagine that Lot is not so drunk as to impede his ability to have sex, but at the same time so intoxicated that he doesn't notice his own daughters having sex with him. The rabbis express suspicion about this last point, explaining an extra dot over the word when she got up, and it's actually verse 33. You wouldn't believe how much I had to look to find this out. It's a typo. Implies that the Masoretes believe that he really did know. Indeed, in a midrash, Genesis Rabbah quotes a sage who claims that the sex was really Lot's idea. At first, we would not know whether Lot lusted for his daughters or his daughters lusted for him, but on the basis of what is written in the Proverbs, he who separates himself seeks desire. It is clear that Lot lusted after his daughters, and his daughters did not lust after him. In this reading, Lot's running away with his daughters to a cave instead of saying in Zohar is evidence that he's attracted to them and wants to get them alone. Okay, so what we're about to read now, I think, Jim, relax, Jim.
Wasn't Lot supposed to be one of the righteous guys?
Well, you can judge. Where does it say? I don't think it says that Lot was righteous, except that he's allowed to live. So,
okay, all right, that's interesting.
You can thank God you're a Christian after reading this particular take. And I want to emphasize that this is not an official take on it, although apparently, at least in one midrash, they raised the question. Now what we're going to see is what the author, who is a black woman scholar, she is a absolute genuine scholar of I'll just jump down to her bio. She's the Right Reverend. I don't know how you get to be a Right Reverend. I actually think being a Reverend is pretty cool. I don't know if any of you know Julie Morris, who's an Episcopal priest, and her title is Reverend. We had an argument about which title was cooler, Reverend or Rabbi, and we each thought we each coveted the other title. The Right Reverend, and I guess Sam, but she is a woman, is a professor of Hebrew Bible, holds a PhD in Hebrew Bible in Duke University, and is an ordained Episcopal priest. And she's a womanist Bible scholar. We'll see what that means in a moment. So what I find very interesting about this, and almost as interesting as the discussion of the text itself, is modern midrash. So here is a feminist, as we'll see, she calls herself a womanist scholar, rereading these stories from the perspective of Lot's wife and Lot's daughters, focusing on them rather than on, kind of the mainline simple reading of the text. And the thing I like about it is, first, it's wild and it's way out there, and I'm sort of attracted to that. But also, it's clearly based in the text. I mean, it's not just coming up with these interpretations, completely off the wall, but it is based in the text. So I think I'm going to take the liberty of reading. A womanist reading of the two sisters. As noted above, the story is meant as a burlesque against Moabites and Ammonites, to poke fun at their names by painting their origins as incestuous. But the crafting of the story as a case of daughters as the initiatives of incest is problematic, as in the real world, the reverse would be the case. I would like to offer the reading of a text that is womanist. I use the term as defined and elucidated by Alice Walker. Broadly, a womanist is a black feminist or feminist of color. Womanism is my feminism. It is not oppositional to feminism writ large. It is a signifier that the feminist work is a black feminist work, which will align with some white and other feminist work, but will stand in strong distinction to the strands of white feminism that do not meaningfully address white supremacy, class, or other intersecting layers. I've never heard of womanism before this, and I don't think, maybe you will see things that I'm not seeing, but I don't see anything in her reading that would be different if it were written by a white woman or a black woman. Okay. My particular reading of the Two Sisters story is inspired by Alana Rashkow's Daddy Dearest and the Invisible Spirit of Wine, theme and variation, taboo or not taboo. Rashkow notes several details of the story have commonalities with reports of incest. An absent mother figure, emotionally or physically, use of alcohol or drugs, blame placed on younger persons in the relationship, isolation of the victims, and the controlling their access to other people. While all these details are explained in the text as being for unique reasons, they connect to the problems noted above. The sisters have no access to other men because they incorrectly believed that no other men were still alive. But why did they think that? Their husbands did not come with them because when Lot presented what Adonai was going to do to Sodom, he sounded ridiculous. But did he have to sound ridiculous? Could he have made a more convincing presentation or asked them just to come along anyway? Why does Lot decide to leave Zoar when he has no reason to think it would be destroyed? Remember, first he's asked to go to the hills, and he says, I can't really make it that far. Let me go to Zohar, and the angels basically agree, speaking for God, agree to that request. And there are people in Zohar, but he now says we have to leave Zohar. Why does he allow himself to get wildly drunk just because the daughters keep pouring wine in his juglet? Why does Lot prefer letting his daughters be raped rather than his guests? If his guests are so important, why doesn't he just offer himself? I think that's a very interesting question. Jim, you're really enjoying this. Yeah, so remember, the citizens of Sodom want to rape the foreigner guests. And Lot basically says, take my virgin daughters. But if these guys are interested in homosexual rape, why wouldn't he just go out and offer himself?
Because he's only one person, they wanted two, or because he's too old, they're not attracted to him. They want someone young.
That's a reasonable question. Yes, Les.
Aren't these the daughters that are virgins? Because they're saying they left their husbands.
Yes, his daughters are virgins.
Yeah, but they said that just before they said they left their husbands behind.
Yes, but they were betrothed but not yet married.
So we would say in today's word, being engaged. And if if a woman left her engaged husband, fiance, they would say in this language that she was leaving her husband?
Yes.
What it amounts to, and this is getting a little more Jewish technical, they've done the ketubah, but they haven't done the kuppah.
No, they've actually done kiddushin. They've done the exchange of rings with the pronouncement, Harayat Mikudeshet Li, behold, you are consecrated to me with this ring, according to the laws of Moses in Israel.
Well, they wouldn't have said according to the laws of Moses because Moses didn't exist yet.
Yeah. But that's what it means in modern text. So when, just as a point of information, in ancient times, couples were engaged or betrothed a year before the wedding. They had a ceremony where they would exchange something of value, typically a ring, with that statement, behold, you are consecrated to me with this ring, according to the laws of Moses in Israel. And they were betrothed. They were not yet married, so they could not be intimate with each other. but because they were betrothed, they could not be intimate with anyone else. And if they decided not to go ahead with the wedding, they would actually need a Jewish divorce called a get in Jewish law. And that's the interpretation that we read about last week. In my retelling, this is now the author, of course, speaking, of the story in a womanist midrash, Lot and his wife and daughters, all matriarchs, will be named. I will call the sisters Zekena, elder woman. Zaken means older. Feminine form of that would be Zakena, elder woman, and Ketana, younger woman. Katan means small. And their mother Nitzaveh, she who stood. Because in the story in the Bible, none of these women are named. I will be using the bare bones of the biblical narrative reinterpreted, giving these women's story its own voice. So now what she is doing is rewriting the story, clearly adding a bunch of things that aren't in the story. So here's her rewriting. Somewhere between Ur of the Chaldees and the land of Canaan, Lot found and married a woman who cared for more than hearth and home. Nitzavah stood beside Lot in times of prosperity and times of scarcity. She stood beside him when he was taken captive and when he was rescued. She stood beside him among the flocks and herds, shepherding, shearing, spinning, weaving, sewing, patching, culling, butchering, skinning, cooking, storing, planning, birthing, nursing, caring, carrying her daughter Zekanah on her back and then on her hip, repeating the cycle of pregnancy, birth, and nursing for Ketanah, nurturing and teaching her daughters, making a home and a life for them in whatever circumstances they found themselves. Zekanah and Ketanah learned how to do all they needed to survive as women in the Middle Bronze Age. They were desirable not just because of their parents' wealth of flocks and herds, but because they were their mother Nitzavah, daughter. Their suitors knew that Zekanah and Ketanah could be counted on to stand by them through life's ups and downs, just as Nitzavah stood by Lot as their fortune rose and fell. Perhaps their would-be husbands hoped to be blessed with daughters as competent, capable, and desirable as Zekanah and Ketanah. So clearly, the way she's telling the story, the focus is on the value of the women, and you don't see that a lot in biblical texts. Okay. As Lot watched his daughters grow into women, he found himself uncomfortably attracted to them. When the men of Sodom came for his guests, Lot offered to save them with their innocent bodies of his daughters and rid himself of their temptation once and for all, or perhaps he wanted to make them unmarriageable for reasons of his own. Just as a commentary, a woman that was raped and not a virgin would be less desirable as a marriage prospect than a virgin. But the messengers of the all-seeing God, whom Hagar saw, intervened and saved Zekanah and Ketanah from their father's scheme. Nitzavah was stunned and speechless when she saw this, unable to comprehend how her husband could offer up their daughters as sexual chattel. I think all of us are stunned by that. I want to actually take a quick look at footnote number 22. I am someone who always looks at every footnote. Her translation for the divine name, for God's name, is shaped by a women's biblical canon in which Hagar figures prominently as the only person to name God and the first to receive an annunciation. So there's a really interesting article, Hagar, an Egyptian maidservant suffering as seen by Adonai. And so here is that article, and no doubt we will look at it at some point in the future. And it is true, she actually calls God by a name, and I think is the only person in the Torah that comes up with a name for God, which is pretty remarkable. Okay, let me go back to the text. Okay, as the messengers prepared Lot, Nitzavah, Zekana, and Ketana, and their espoused husbands. So their husbands were espoused but not yet married. For the end of life as they knew it, a desperate plan began to take shape in Lot's mind. He went to his sons-in-law and presented their leaving Sodom in such a way to ensure that they would not accompany his family on their flight to safety. Thus he succeeded in dissolving the marriages of Zekana and Ketana without their knowledge, and reported back so as to make the young men sound like the guilty party. Nitzavah alone was suspicious, but what could she say? As they made their escape, Lot's cowardice got the better of his attraction, and he begged to be allowed to flee to the city of Zoar. And yet, on the way to the city, everything changed. Lot and the sisters made it, but Nitzavah, overcome what she saw Lot do the night before, and terrified of what was to come if her suspicions about Lot were correct, turned back to Sodom and was destroyed along with it. When Zekana and Ketana asked where their mother was, Lot told them that God had killed their mother for her disobedience, and now she was a pillar of salt. Once Sodom was destroyed, Lot's panic was over. And with his wife gone, he decided that he did not want to live in Zoar any longer. There were too many eyes in the city for what he had planned. So Lot told his daughters that Zoar was only allowed to remain standing as a resting place for them. Soon Adonai would destroy it too, as he destroyed all other humans but them, and they must run to the hills to survive. He told them that after Zoar is destroyed, there would be no one else in the world but them. As happened in the time of Noah, Adonai had destroyed the world again, this time by fire. So interesting that he had a precedent in Noah. Lot indoctrinated Zekana and Ketana with this belief, and he would often say, as if thinking out loud, that it is terrible how humanity will end with them, since there is no one left to populate the world. He would tell stories about the first human family, Adam and Eve, Cain, Abel, and Seth, and ask questions like, I wonder how they had children. Zekana answered they must have had children, and Ketana said, I guess they were allowed to have sex with their sisters because the world needed people. And Lot knew he had them. It was only a matter of time. By the way, this is a real issue. In the film Inherit the Wind, in one of the court scenes where basically an atheist is questioning, the Bible, it says he's talking about the story of the Garden of Eden. And if you read the story of the Garden of Eden, it says after Cain murders Abel and is sent to wander the world, it said, and Cain knew his wife, and they had children. Now you have the children of Cain. So the question, that he asks, and we can ask, is where did his wife come from?
Yeah.
Okay. In the Bible, we have Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Cain murders Abel. And now all of a sudden he gets married. So where did she come from? And sure enough, there's midrash. If you've got a question, midrash has an answer. And the answer is that they had sisters. And in fact, they had twin sisters. So Cain wanted Abel's twin sister for a wife, and Abel wouldn't go along with this, and that's why Cain murdered Abel. Because we really don't know why. Well, the story of God accepting one's offerings and not the other. But anyway, this is the stuff of midrash. So if you think her midrash is kind of wild and far-fetched, it's not outside the bounds of, I would say, conventional midrash. And so basically what she's sort of making an allusion to that, and basically Lot is saying, well, incest is really okay in a time of world emergency. So, lesson in Alan.
You said that Cain must have had sisters, but when Cain
Or Abel.
or Abel,
Yeah, and their brothers. So, yeah, so it's the same
so
thing.
Cain kills them, and then he says, "But I'm going to go out in the world, and they are going to do this, that, and the other thing." Not the sisters. He's talking about the rest of the world when he goes out, that people are going to attack him. Where did they come from?
Who are you talking about now?
Okay,
Cain or Lot?
No, you were talking about Cain and Abel, and
Right.
with Adam and Eve, and
Right.
that there were more people, so they must have had sisters that they procreated with. But what I'm
Right.
asking is, Cain finds that, it's found out that he killed Abel, and then they put, I guess, a scarlet letter on him or something like that.
Yes, the
He
marks.
goes, but people, when I go out, they're going to kill me.
Where'd they come from?
Where did those people come from? They're not sisters, but where'd
they come from?
Yeah.
Well, Les, I'm asking you, where'd they come from?
Well, the way I have to think about it is, this is our story, and perhaps there was other people in the world, and this is the way we came into existence. That's the only way I can answer.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that Adam and Eve were Jews. It says they were the only two people in the world, and they had two sons. And somehow more people populate the earth. When people ask me this question, my response is the Bible isn't interested in that question. And for me, it's clear that I don't take the Bible literally as history. If I take it literally as history, you have all these sort of unanswerable questions. But what I admire is what the author of this article is doing, is they're saying, well, Lot is going back and talking about, what happened with Cain and Abel, and clearly they must have married their sisters, because who else is there in the world? So he is using that as a way of teaching his young daughters that incest will be okay. So Alan and then Brian. So
this part we brought up about there's two sisters who are not named, and is measured as described in the midrash. Are these sisters mentioned in the Talmud?
We talking about the Lot's daughters?
When we realize that.
Are we talking about Lot's children or Adam's children?
Adam's children.
I'm guessing yes, but I don't know the specifics.
The reason the part that goes through my mind is that we don't know their names, because that's such a common thing in the Bible that the women are not mentioned, with a few exceptions.
Yes, and the exceptions become very important.
Yeah, but this is if there's ever a first time, this would be the first time.
So for example, the fact that Hagar is named. I mean, the other article is really interesting. The fact that Hagar is named is very significant, that we know her name.
You translated that last week as having...
Yeah, Ger means stranger, so Hagar would be the stranger. Brian.
Yeah, I guess I just want to observe that the original story seems to have a lot of complexity and nuance and interesting questions. In what I'll call a feminist retelling of the story, it seems like we very much are oversimplifying it, and it all comes down to the father's just lust for his own children, his desire for incest. Mm-hmm. It just seems to kind of oversimplify and strip a lot of the interesting parts.
So
of the
what
story
I would say, think about it almost mathematically, is the original story has a lot of open ends and unanswered questions. What midrash does is it tries to answer some of the questions. So how is it that this happened to Lot? I mean, if we just take the story on the face of it, it seems hardly believable that he would offer his virgin daughters, that he would be so drunk as to not know that the daughters were even there, yet he could still impregnate them.
Was it Purim?
Sorry?
Was it Purim?
Was it Purim? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you're asking, were they in costume?
No, in the sense of why was he get so drunk?
No, they made him drunk because they wanted to rape him, according to the
raised was why would he have been? Why would he have been willing to drink so much? And I'm theorizing.
Yeah, that's one of the questions. Yeah, but he wasn't Jewish, so let's not go
Okay.
there. And this is, 1,000 years, several thousand years before the Purim story. So, but anyway, what I would say is I agree with you absolutely, Brian, that there are a number of questions which are raised which can be answered in a lot of different ways. What midrash does is it picks one of those ways to answer them. And it's not the only one. I mean, if there's a lot of midrash out there, and if you read midrash, they will have conflicting descriptions of addressing specific stories. It's not like here is the explanation of this problem. There are 10 explanations, and we'll find 10 different midrashim. And so one of my goals in just presenting this story is to kind of expose you to how far-fetched and wild it can be. Yet I don't think there's anything in here which conflicts with the biblical account. It's a way of explaining the biblical account from a particular perspective. I mean, ultimately, if you really want to get right down to it, Judaism and Christianity both begin with the Hebrew Bible. Judaism has one take on the Hebrew Bible, and Christianity has another take on the Hebrew Bible. And I don't think I would never go so far as to say Christianity's take on the Hebrew Bible is wrong or in error, but it's a way of understanding it. And particularly if you translate it into Greek, because the Greek translation gives you nuances that you don't find in the original Hebrew. So, okay, so let me continue. On the night when Zekenah, the older sister, gave him the cup of wine, Lot understood that this was the night. So he drank a bit more than he was used to and feigned drunkenness. The girls were young and innocent, and they wouldn't know the difference anyway. The same thing happened the next night with Ketanah. At first, Zekenah and Ketanah believed that their father didn't know what happened. But when they told him about it, they could see he wasn't surprised. As the days passed, they began to notice their father leering at them, and the truth dawned upon them. The whole thing was the old man's plan. As their bodies swelled with children, he tricked them as their bodies swelled with the children, he tricked them into conceiving. They stood up for themselves in their mother Nitzavah's name. They did not yet understand the extent of his perfidy, still believing the world to be empty. But when they ran away, they quickly found that Zoar still stood, and the world was dotted with villages and cities, as it always had been. They began to wander to make sure their father couldn't find them. In one village, they met a prophetess, and when they confessed what they had done, she told them that it was not their fault and not to worry. Adonai would bless the fruits of their union. Each would inherit part of the land on which they lived. The daughters gave their sons names, which reflected the harsh reality of their origins, understanding that Lot had lost the goodwill of the all-seeing God whom Hagar saw, Adonai, and it now had been passed on to them. By the way, it was called to our attention earlier in the story that in this case, the daughters give their own sons names rather than the father naming them. No one knows what happened to Lot, though it is said that his shame and guilt caused him to stay in the cave and that he drank himself into oblivion. In any event, he never met his sons. The boys grew up knowing what Lot did to their mothers, and the knowledge was passed on generation after generation to their sons and daughters. It is said that many centuries later, when Ruth the Moabite became part of the Israelite people, it was she who added the mysterious dot over that Hebrew word, one of the words in which the Torah claims that Lot didn't know that his daughters had done what they had done. The dot is still there to remind us that he knew and that he had to have known because he planned it. Now we know these dots were added, several thousand years later. I think that's the end of the article. And I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll give you one other really significant example of this. Here's the example. David and Bathsheba. Okay, you remember the story. David, I love reading the story carefully. David is home when generals go to war. Troops are out there fighting. David is lounging around on his palace, and he notices a beautiful woman bathing, Bathsheba, on the roof. And he has servants called to bring her to him, and they have sex, and she becomes pregnant. And it's clear from the story that it's David's child because she had just gone to the mikvah, according to the story, even after her menses. And her husband, Uriah, is out in the field fighting. When David realizes she becomes pregnant, David calls for Uriah to come back and, asks him kind of, how are the troops doing? Everything okay? Great. Yes. Go home and visit your wife. And Uriah says, how could I do that when my men are fighting in the fields? Should I enjoy the pleasure of my marital bed? So he sleeps on the palace steps. David throws another party, gets him drunk, tries to get him to go home, but he refuses. So David, that beloved king of Israel, basically writes a death sentence for Uriah, writes an order to the general, seals the letter, sends the letter with Uriah to give to his general to have Uriah sent to the front of the battle so he will be killed, and he is killed. David, after Bathsheba's period of mourning is over, David marries Bathsheba. She has the child, and the child dies, and it's a whole other interesting little subplot. But David and Bathsheba continue to be married, and Bathsheba is the mother of King Solomon. Okay? And in the line of you know who, Jim? So the problem from a Jewish legal point of view is if you have committed adultery with a woman, you are prohibited from marrying that woman. Okay, so let's, Jim, do you play poker? You
No.
shouldn't because your actions are very transparent, which I adore. So let's just actually, believe it or not, there's a contemporary example of this. Well, and I won't go into it because I don't want to reveal it. But if a man has sex with a married woman, they have committed adultery. Now, if she divorces her husband, or if her husband dies, they are not allowed to marry. And if they do marry, their children are mamzers, who are illegitimate and are not allowed to marry other, regular Jews. They can only marry other mamzers. So it's a huge problem. And now we have King David with this problem. Okay? So how do we get David off the hook? And how do we keep Solomon from being a mamzer? And by the way, since the Messiah, Jim, yours and ours, are in the line of David and Solomon, how do we keep the Messiah from being a mamzer? Okay? This is a big problem. And I'll tell you how the rabbi solved it. And it's not further fetched than this story. The rabbi solved it by saying, when Uriah left to go to war, he gave his wife what is called a conditional get, a conditional bill of divorce, which says, if you haven't seen me in person by a particular date, our marriage is considered void and divorce. And the date of the divorce depends on how that conditional get is written. So what the rabbis say is Uriah wrote Bathsheba a conditional get. And notice that Uriah never sees Bathsheba. He doesn't see her. He refuses to go see her. So therefore, once he is dead, their divorce was effective the date that he left to go to war. And David is off the hook, and we can all sing, David, Melech Yisrael. Chai, chai, v'kaya. Okay, and Jesus can be born in the city of David in Bethlehem. I think there's a holiday coming up about something like that. I always forget. Um, um, and so that's how the rabbis get in the Talmud. I'm sure this is in the Talmud, but it's midrash. They're inserting other stuff in the story. They trace it back to some really oblique stuff, but that's how they get David off the hook in a very important case. I mean, much more important, I would say, than this case. Alan, and then Les.
This law, if I can call it that, they can't have this married because the adultery was at play. In the time frame of when King David lived, were these rules already in place in the community?
Do you believe in the oral Torah?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. It's in the oral Torah. It's in the Talmud.
But this feel okay, but all right, then that's kind of creating an environment where you can make retroactive.
You believe in Talmud, then clap your hands.
I was thinking more about.
Sorry? No, that's really the answer.
I was thinking about Santa Claus, but
that's what the rabbis are saying, that those laws applied to King David.
Okay.
I was once sitting with an ultra-Orthodox rabbi actually in Jerusalem, and he was talking about how King David would spend the night reading the Torah. And I foolishly, this was a long time ago, pointed out that the Torah wasn't really codified until the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, which would have been 500 years after David. And he said, give me a break. Moses got the Torah. So these are our myths, and we're sticking to them. Les.
Two quick things. First of all, I thought when Uriah was sent out, wasn't he sent out with a whole bunch of generals? So it wouldn't be that he was isolated? Or am I incorrect?
He was actually sent out with the instruction to be given to his general,
right,
that he be placed in the forward heat of the fighting and be killed. The actual war placed him with a bunch of other people, and a lot of people were killed, making it possibly even worse, because the general would have looked like an idiot if they had sent Uriah out almost by himself to be killed.
Now, question I have that I know is, my wife is behind me. She'll freak out. Jim will probably kind of question this. What I cannot understand is the Messiah comes from the lineage of David. If God is the father of the Messiah, how is that from the lineage of David?
Because Joseph was the betrothed husband of Mary. And the tribe goes with the husband, and they were betrothed. They had not had sex, but it's not biology. It's that's my understanding. I don't know, Jim, if you have another. Yeah, because actually now I should really look at. Actually, what I need is a. Yeah, so in the story of Esther, let me look at this. I'll take a quick look. In the story of Esther, I don't know if they're tracing the lineage. Actually, so hang on. Okay, Tanakh. Esther. I'm sorry, not Esther, Ruth. So I gotta find the end of the book of Ruth. So, yeah, so it's traced to David. Now, so what do we really need to do? Let me just grab one, is get a New Testament. So actually, if you look at the New Testament, the first book of the New Testament is
Matthew. Yeah, he goes through the genealogy.
Matthew, and the genealogy in Matthew is really interesting. In fact, I had to put this up on the screen. You know what? I'm going to see if I can do it easily. Book of Matthew. Let's see. Okay, great. Can you see this? It says Matthew 1, King James Version.
No.
Oh no, I'm not sharing screen. Okay,
Oh.
sorry. My brain is ahead of my brain. Okay, now you can see it, I presume.
Yes.
Okay, let me get rid of. Okay, so this is actually the opening verses of the New Testament, and so it's the book of generation of Jesus Christ, son of David, and so on. So I want to call your attention to some things which are mind-blowing. Jim, you might want to put your hand under your jaw at the moment. Remember, this is your book, not mine. So look at all the begats. We have no women. We have Abraham, we don't have Sarah, we have Isaac, we don't have Rebecca, we have Jacob, we don't have Leah and Rachel. We have more men. And now let's take a look. We're going to have some women. So we have Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz of Rechab. You remember who Rechab is? Rechab's a prostitute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And Boaz begot Obed, and Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. So they're going through the male line. We'll see how this. And David begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. Okay, this is actually the King James Version, so it's a little awkward. So they don't name Bathsheba in the book of Matthew. They identify her as Uriah's wife. I think they're underlining how crazy this is. Okay, and we have more men. We have no women. We have more men. There's Solomon. More men. Let's see if they have. Okay. Oh, there's Ruth. Ruth is mentioned. We got Obed of Ruth, and she's a Moabitess. Okay. There's Ruth. And then as we get down to the bottom, it goes from Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, who was born Jesus. So what I would say is, it's a question I get a lot. I don't know, Jim, if you want to chime in, but my understanding of this is Jesus is born of the house of David through Joseph.
It's interesting that both Josephs are sons of Jacob.
Yes, it is. It is interesting.
Nice point. Cool.
Yes, it is. It is interesting.
Cool.
But so my understanding of that.
This is not the Joseph who was part of Egypt. This is way after.
This is Joseph and Mary. So my understanding is the question is, whose house is? Let's take the story as though it's true. Okay. Mary somehow becomes impregnated by God, and the child is Jesus. Now the question is, whose house is Jesus from? And the answer is Joseph. Even because we're not talking about biology and insemination here, but he is the betrothed husband of Mary. That's the answer. It may not convince you, Les. You know, that's okay. You don't have to accept it. But my understanding is, I don't know, Jim, if you have a different insight on that. But that's my understanding. Let me first ask Jim if that.
Yeah, that's correct, and it's really cool that you brought this up, because it was, every day at the Mass there's a different biblical readings. It was either today's reading or yesterday's reading. I think it was today's that they read this.
Oh, interesting.
This was today's, and you think, why did a guy start a book with all this begat, which doesn't mean much to us? Well, it meant a lot, because each one of these guys wrote to different people. John wrote to the Romans, Luke wrote to the Greeks, Mark wrote to the I forget, but Matthew wrote to the Jews.
Yes, Matthew is the most Jewish of the books. Yeah, and there's a lot of begats in genealogy in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, what we read from Ruth is the genealogy down from Ruth down to David. So tracing genealogy is a very Jewish biblical thing to do. And I have this class, maybe I'll teach it again, which is really fun, which I call Sex in the Bible and the illicit sex in the Bible and the genealogy of the Messiah. Because every one of the women that are mentioned in this genealogy have wacko backgrounds. There's a lot of good old-fashioned nice Jewish women like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and so on in this discussion, and none of them are mentioned. The only ones that are mentioned in Matthew are the strange sexual encounters. And my professor of midrash, Norman Cohen, I don't know if you know Norman Cohen, professor of midrash, was provost. I once took a class in midrash with him, and he used this, and that's where I learned about this. He said it's clearly a Jewish midrash, which was lost to the Hebrew Bible, but and so the interesting thing for me is, what's the point of mentioning only these strange women? And my go ahead, Jim. You gonna?
Oh, well, I've heard when they give the sermon on this reading, they'll talk about you one might think that you are not worthy because of you have sins on your book.
Right.
But look at where Jesus himself came from these women. And so if
Right.
God can use women like that in such a great way, God can use us regardless of
Yes.
how crappy we are.
Yes, that's exactly. I mean, I would state it slightly differently.
You wouldn't use
Let me
crappy.
see if I can find my. Yeah, but I come to the same conclusion. My conclusion is that redemption, David, redemption will come from families as crazy as yours and mine. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay, I just want to show you. Oops.
You know, the same message is in the Torah because all the families were screwed up.
Yes,
You think?
they are really bizarre. So, let me
If
just stop
Joe
this.
had been a Cohen, would you?
Hold on 1 second. So this is actually the last slide in my presentation. So basically, here's the genealogy of the Messiah. Clearly, I'm not going down. Oh, let me find you guys here. I'm not going down to Jesus. So you have Lot. Abraham's the uncle of Lot, Lot's daughters. So you have Amnon and you have Moab. And it says in Deuteronomy, I don't know if you can see this, but it says, no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. So you have Moab, you have Ruth, who's a Moabite. And then according to the Book of Kings, Naamah, who is was one of the wives of Solomon that gives rise to Rehoboam, was an Ammonite. And then over on this side, you have Tamar and Judah. Tamar is Judah's daughter-in-law, and she poses as a prostitute, and she becomes pregnant by Judah. Actually, I have another article which focuses on this. And you have their child is Perez, and then 4 generations later, we have Salmon, who marries Rahab, who is a prostitute, and they have Boaz, who marries Ruth, who is a Moabitess, and that leads to King David. So it's pretty bizarre.
In what respect is she merely posing as or pretending to be a prostitute? I mean, she has sex with someone in return for payment. How isn't that?
Who are you talking about? Who are you talking about?
Tamar.
Yes. So in that story, which we will discuss in a subsequent article, Tamar is betrothed to Judah's youngest son. But because Judah's 2 older brothers have died, after being married to Tamar, Judah sent Tamar back to her father's house and is withholding her from marrying Judah's youngest son. So Tamar basically poses as a prostitute. She engages in prostitution.
My
She
question is, in what respect is this posing as opposed to actually being?
Okay, so because that's her only trick. She's a one-trick pony. I mean,
Okay.
she's not in the business of being a prostitute.
Okay.
She does it to basically become pregnant by Judah, and then when Judah finds out that his daughter-in-law, because she's still his daughter-in-law, two sons who have died, and one that she is betrothed according to levirate marriage to the youngest, he orders her to be killed because she's committed adultery. And then she says, "Oh, by the way, the person with that committed adultery with me owns this cord and seal. Do you recognize them?" And Judah then realizes that it's him, and he unlawfully withheld Tamar from his son, and Judah has children, um, which leads to David. And this article, which I found, which we'll cover in coming weeks, is about the other characters named Tamar, women in the Bible. And they have some really interesting stories. And the question is, what's up with Tamar? It means date, or date palm. So anyway, really interesting stuff. This is all the story of reading the Bible super, super, super carefully, which for me is a joy. I mean, you may think it's kind of cuckoo, but I love it. Alan.
We're still here, Rabbi, so we must
Yeah.
we'll approach it the same way. We enjoy that part. My question has to do with the following, and I'll preface it by saying I believe that what I understand of the Christian story is that some parts of the Hebrew Bible are sort of superseded. And here's my question is because at the time of Jesus, the line passed from father to son. I mean, that change of mother becoming Jewish or became later. So at this point, the sequence of events is we get from David to Joseph, the
Right.
Mary, and in a way, the biological path is interrupted because the Jesus isn't born to Jesus. Jesus is born to God with Mary. Okay, so how does the Christian story tell that the lineage to Jesus comes from David or Ruth? Is that still in there, even though
We just read it.
it's interrupted, in my opinion?
And in your opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion, but my guess is that your opinion is not an issue for Christianity. And I think there's another, and Jim, I don't know if you can quote it, I could do some research. I think there are other genealogies which trace more through Mary than Joseph. And by the way, I'm going to say something that will blow your mind. In Judaism, your tribe, okay, goes with your father. I think you know this. A Cohen's son is a Cohen, has nothing to do with the mother. That is still true. Now the question is, suppose you have a interfaith marriage. Now I'm talking about traditional Judaism. An interfaith marriage is not recognized as a marriage.
Unless there's a legitimate conversion.
Then it's not interfaith.
Oh, I'm
If
sorry.
the person is converted, then it's two Jews.
Okay,
right? So I'm saying now I'm talking about how matrilineal descent really occurs. If you have a Jew and a non-Jew who are married, it's not a marriage according to Judaism. Okay? You with me? Now, a woman gives birth and she's not married. We don't know who the father is. Is the child a Jew or not a Jew? If the woman is Jewish, the child is a Jew. If the woman is not Jewish, the child is not a Jew. If you have hold on, let me finish and then you can comment or argue. If the woman is not Jewish and she's married to a Jewish man, that marriage is not recognized by Judaism as being a marriage. So that woman has a child, according to Jewish law, we don't know who the father is, nor do we care.
You mean we don't know? Biologically, you probably do.
It's not the product, put it this way. It's not the product of a marriage. So the child can't be Jewish because the mother, who is not Jewish, was not married.
That's the biblical definition, right?
That's the Jewish definition.
Jewish from the biblical period, not the rabbinic period.
No,
right?
the rabbinic period. I'm talking about up until you have Reformed Jews who are recognizing marriages between Jews and non-Jews. So if a non-Jewish woman is married to a Jewish guy in a strict Jewish world, the marriage is not recognized under Jewish law, and the woman having children would not be recognized as having children with a Jewish husband. That's actually the legal logic behind matrilineal descent.
The husband, who is known, but not the way you worded it, known to be a Kohen, the boy who is born to this non-Jewish marriage, the boy's not a Kohen then.
No, he's not Jewish. Can't be a Kohen if he's not Jewish.
Okay.
So then Reform Judaism changed this rule basically by saying if a child is raised Jewishly, the child is Jewish. And I would say,
raised Jewishly and has at least one Jewish parent.
Yeah, with at least one Jewish parent, right. Or if the child is converted, obviously the child would be Jewish. So that's actually the legal logic behind matrilineal descent. It's really odd. I mean, it has the side effect of saying you have a problem. If you go back in time, how do you know who the father of any child is with certainty? You always know who the mother is with certainty, but you don't always know who the father is, right?
I think the origin of some of this had to do with Jesus, and so
I don't think so.
I would claim, no, in the part of where I was developing my logic was related to Jesus, the logic of Jesus. The theology doesn't worry about the fact that the history predating Joseph all the way back to David and all that, that's not really relevant. I'm being too analytic, is what I am.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but by and large, I would say that Christianity, I stopped. Christianity is not so concerned with rabbinic law.
No, but does the Christian story say that Jesus comes from the lineage that comes from David and Jesse and
oh, yes.
Yeah, but of course, biologically, it's interrupted the way I see it, of course.
But I don't think Christian law worries about that.
Apparently not.
Because Christian law goes one step further. I mean, you're having a technical issue about whose tribe Jesus is. Christianity is focused on whether Jesus is God. If you don't have a problem with Jesus being God, my guess is you shouldn't have a problem with whether Jesus is from the line of David.
That's the answer.
I'm just guessing here. And I was telling Jim as we got on, the book, I threw it out. There's a company called The Great Courses. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Yeah.
Who has heard of it? I'm just curious.
I think I heard of it, but
okay.
Time ago.
So anyway, they sell DVDs of courses, and there are a lot of them. I probably have about 10 different ones, and they're going out of the DVD business because only some of us old dinosaurs actually use DVDs for anything, and so they're strictly doing things online and download, and so they're having a great sale on DVDs. And one of the courses is 24 half-hour sessions on the question, how did Jesus become God? And it deals with Roman history and Jewish history and the debates. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but there were tremendous debates in the first few centuries about whether Jesus was only God and just appeared in human form, but it was an
yeah.
illusion, or whether Jesus was, the nature of Jesus. There's a controversy. It's called the Arian um, um, controversy. And so the author is going. And I'm not so crazy with the idea of sitting through 12 hours on this. I wish I could get one good 1 hour program, but I am looking forward to understand that because as in promoting this series, I say the idea that Jesus is God is probably the single most influential idea of Western culture. I would not disagree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Joseph's an Israelite. Mary was Jewish. Am I correct so far?
Both Joseph and Mary are Israelites. Yes.
Okay. If Joseph had been a Cohen or a Levi, would Jesus have inherited that?
If your grandmother had wheels, would she be a trolley wheel?
No,
Would she be a trolley? Joseph is from the line of Judah.
Right, but I'm saying, does it follow the biology?
I don't know. I don't know.
Follow the
You're
marriage?
asking a Jewish legal question of a character in the New Testament.
Stephen, you're going down the same path that I went down. That doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Jim gets this because he doesn't get all the clutter that are in our minds about.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the Christian reaction is: are you Jews still hung up on all of these intricacies of Jewish law rather than bathing in the love and acceptance of Jesus, who died for your sins? You're asking whether if he had been a Cohen, would Jesus be a Cohen? That's what's bothering you?
Be a better God. They're talking about whether he's a good God or a better God.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
When we have, quote unquote, our Messiah, which now is becoming possibly the Messianic age, will there have to be a tracing back to David? For us to accept
hold on.
Okay.
The teaching is that it'll come from the house of David because the Hebrew word Mashiach means anointed, which means he will be Melech Yisrael, a king of Israel. And according to Judaism, the king of Israel is from the tribe of Judah and a descendant of David.
What I'm saying is, would we, if the Messiah came, would we in discussion say, is he really the Messiah? Do we have DNA to prove he came from the, I mean, would that be it, or would it just be accepted?
Alan and Stephen would be insisting on that analysis. And I don't know if you have DNA from King David, but I don't.
And who would even be able to recognize it? I mean, how would you know it came from him?
You've heard this study
World peace. If world peace breaks out
But
and lions and lambs are napping together,
then the Messiah's here.
and AOC Cortez, whatever her name is having dinner with Donald Trump, the Messiah may have come.
And Benjamin Netanyahu in the same room.
I'm sorry?
And Benjamin Netanyahu in the same room too.
Yeah, and and Putin, and yeah. So if world peace breaks out, then the Messiah may have come. And quite frankly, that's good enough for me. I don't care about his DNA.
When you brought up the DNA and going back to biblical times, do you remember reading when they started to use DNA to study genealogy? I think it was Oxford University. They did a study, and it is published, and the study was, "Are you a Cohen? How far back was the Cohen?"
Yes.
And they did this study on the beaches of Tel Aviv, asking people verbally and checking one marker in their DNA. And when they finished this analysis, they had figured out the marker or the way it worked that they could go back about 800 years. And that would take you to the early Middle Ages. So they didn't figure out how to get back to Aaron, but that was sort of the direction.
But my understanding of that, and I haven't read recent analysis of it,
Yeah.
is first of all, the marker is in the Y chromosome, so it follows the father's line, not the mother's line.
Right.
And with a fairly high level, like 80% plus, people who claim that they are Kohanes have that DNA marker.
Except they've also found the DNA marker for Kohanim in a large number of non-Jews, which
Okay. So yeah, I mean that's perfectly understandable. Them Cohens get around. But the other interesting thing is that you don't find that with Levites. You find, and you would expect to find the exact same thing with Levites as with Kohanes, but that actually lends credence to Richard Elliott Friedman's thesis that Levites were something different. They were just the Jews that came out of Egypt. They weren't necessarily all from Levi. Whereas there's a good indication that the Kohanes were all from the same person, namely Aaron. I mean, you could say Aaron. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up because I've got other things I need to do, but this was interesting and there's a lot else to study. I hope you enjoyed it and
Oh, it was wonderful.
troubled by it. And,
we tell us the schedule again on Wednesday.
okay, so we're dark the next 3 Mondays and the next 2 Wednesdays.
Okay.
But I will send out notices because I have visitors and things going on. So
have a good New Year, my friend.
Yep. Happy holidays, Jim.
Happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah.
Merry Christmas, Jim.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Sam.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.
Christmas this year, I think, is on the 24th of Kislev. Is that right?
Kislev?
Sorry, Jim. Everybody's always asking when Hanukkah is. In the Hebrew calendar, Hanukkah is always the same day, the 25th of Kislev. But this year, Christmas is the 24th of Kislev.
Well, are you sure? Because I mean that Hanukkah doesn't start until after Christmas, which would be kind
of... it's the 25th of Kislev starts at the night of Christmas.
The first lighting of the candle will be...
First lighting candle is December 25th.
Okay.
I don't want to confuse us any further. I have done my work here. Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.